we're going to watch a video that breaks down his content Nuke. So Ethan Klein's magnum opus, or whatever you call it, his shining accomplishment of the year, I guess, is creating this content Nuke video to basically prove that Hasan, the leftist streamer, is a terrorist because he's a pro-Palestinian voice. And that's what Ethan Klein does. He attacks pro-Palestinian voices. But does he have any valid points? Is Hasan a terrorist or a terrorist sympathizer? Let's watch it. Let's watch this video. This is a video by Samsen. Shout out. Go watch this video. It's called "The YouTubers Who Backed a Genocide."
If you like my videos and want to help me make more of them and faster, consider joining my Patreon. Thanks. About a month ago, the 6 million subscriber YouTube channel H3H3 Productions released a video called Content Nuke Hasan Piker. In this video, the host, YouTuber Ethan Klein, alleges that the political streamer Hasan Piker is an extremist that supports terrorism and terrorist groups.
And over time, I started to learn that my co-host, he really likes terrorists.
Promotes anti-Semitism and is radicalizing his viewers to do the same.
Just that statement alone, like, how dumb are you, bro? You knew this guy for a long time. He is very public about all his beliefs because he's talking about his beliefs like 9 hours a day, every day. And you had a show with the guy where you're talking leftist politics for like 2 freaking years, bro. So it just suddenly occurred to you that that he likes terrorists? I mean, maybe. But if that's true, then you're an idiot, right? How did you not notice before? You did a show with him for 2 years.
Accuses Hasan of being a rape denialist and goes on to accuse him of prolonging what he calls the Israel-Palestine conflict with his radical views.
This conflict will never end until people realize that Palestinian liberation and Israeli security are not mutually exclusive. You need both, and it can be done, but not while people like Hasan lie,
So that's part of his big argument, his dichotomy, right, that I mentioned earlier. It's either us or them. If we stop genociding the Palestinians, they're going to genocide us. And that's not what pro-Palestinian advocates are advocating for. Just because they want one genocide to stop and they want equality does not mean that Israeli security gets thrown out the window. That's not what that means. And Israeli security and Palestinian security are intertwined. They are certainly intertwined. No one's denying that. Show me where Hasan or any other pro-Palestinian advocacy group is saying we want Palestinians to be free and that means bye-bye Israelis, genocide time. No one's saying that, dude, so shut up.
Propagandize and incite hate. It's people like him, ironically, that prolong the conflict indefinitely.
In this video, Ethan also criticizes Twitch, the platform that Hasan streams on, accusing the company of having a systemic problem of anti-Semitism. He cites the company's open support of Hasan, its sponsorship of a live event that Ethan claims was anti-Semitic.
I feel like this is indefensible, blatant, obvious anti-Semitism, and this was greenlit by Twitch to appear on their main stage.
And its alleged discrimination against Jews through a recent ban on new account signups from Israel. So I'm going to tip my hand a bit here and say at the outset that this video is quite possibly the worst video I've ever seen. It's plagued with factual errors, misrepresentations, contradictions, and overt pro-Israel Bush-era U.S. State Department propaganda. For a more thorough breakdown of all of this video's problems, I'd recommend the YouTube channel Bad Empanada. He's gone point by point with these and debunked them, many of them months prior to the release of Ethan's video. Hasan himself has also responded to most of these claims also months ago. I will leave these videos linked below in a playlist. Given the existence of these dozens of other responses, I'm not here to repeat their arguments. You can just go watch them. No.
And I'll definitely go over Bad Empanada's videos on some later streams because that man does his research and that man goes into great detail, but we're going to have to save that for when I'm doing a longer stream because his video debunking Ethan Klein's content Nuke is like 4 hours long. So we'll save that for another time, but he's right. If you really want a detailed breakdown, that's debunking each point individually. He's the one to go to. Now, Bad Empanada, I don't agree with everything he says, and he acts pretty crazy on other social media platforms. Like, he goes after people. What do you call it? He is I would call a leftist provocateur, like an online provocateur, which is very common in the right-wing world of politics, and it's fully accepted because it does serve a purpose. And Bad Empanada does it on a precision level. So I do think he has a purpose. It's not necessarily my style or my thing that I want to do. But I'm not going to condemn him for it. There's probably like specific things or times that he said some shit online that I'd be like, no, I never would say something like that. But separate the art from the artist, right? His YouTube videos are extremely well researched, and it's easy to verify the facts that he puts forward. So it is what it is.
The real reason I'm talking about Ethan's video today is less about what he says in it and more about what he doesn't say, the things he chooses to leave out. Save for a passing mention of an outdated, vastly underestimated death toll of Palestinians in Gaza, Ethan omits the Palestinian side of the story entirely. He doesn't talk about Gaza. He doesn't give any specifics about what Israel is doing there. And this is an issue for a few reasons, but mainly, all of the points he raises are directly tied to the Gaza genocide. The main targets of this video are some of the only groups in the world that have violently resisted Israel's genocide, and the few figures in independent media that are willing to tell the Palestinian side of the story. By leaving out the broader context, Ethan is able to present a false perception to these millions of viewers about the motivations behind the people his video attacks. He's able to frame them as mindless, terrorist-supporting, America-hating anti-Semites, and not what they really are, which is anti-genocide people that are against genocide. Western media
Well, both things could be true, right? This is where you have to have the nuance to have these discussions. I mean, the U.S. government worked directly with many groups that are now terrorist groups or even were considered terrorist groups at the time, but they worked with them for strategic reasons. Another way you could look at it is, what criteria are we using to label a terrorist group? Well, typically it's like it's harming civilians, right? With a political purpose, right? That's the extra little piece you have to make it terrorism. You're harming or killing civilians or targeting civilians for a political agenda, for a political purpose. And certainly the military wing of Hamas, the military wing of Hezbollah, and I say the military wings because these are actual political parties. They do all sorts of other governing things that don't involve anything bad, that are just normal governing activities, healthcare, everything that a normal government would do. These political parties are involved in as well. Their military groups have done things where they have targeted civilians. And I think that it's okay to separate the two. It's okay to say, I condemn any terrorist activity. I condemn any activity whatsoever that targets or kills innocent civilians. Okay? Now, that being said, well then, if that's the criteria, then Israel and its best buddy, the U.S., are the biggest terrorist groups on the planet, because they have killed far more innocent civilians in the process of their political foreign policy agenda. Are you also condemning Israel and U.S. for them being terrorist groups? If the answer is no, then you have to ask yourself, are you holding a double standard for groups just because they're Muslim, just because they're Arab? That really is what it comes down to, right? Because look at the terrorism that the U.S. has done over the years. Look at the genocide that the U.S. has been involved with over years. Israel has been convicted by the International Criminal Court of war crimes, of genocide. Israel is considered by at least 9 different countries legally a terrorist organization. So even this label of terrorist has nuance to it, right? It's not black and white, it's not cut and dry. And if you're going to go after these Muslim terrorist groups that exist specifically to resist the imperialism of the U.S. in Israel and the genocide of Israel, when you look at what the U.S. and Israel has done, the terrorism that they have done is on a mass scale, far greater. So it's interesting who we label terrorists and who we don't. Anyways, that was kind of a long side rant, but let's get back to it.
Manufacturers consent for large-scale terror operations across the globe in a number of ways. There are more overt forms, like atrocity propaganda. There are also more subtle ways, like deceptively framing information, using passive language, and creating false perceptions about conflicts through things like burying the lead and lies by omission. All of these tactics are present in Ethan's video and the wider online smear campaign that motivated it, but it's that last thing that I think does quite a bit of damage, lying by omission. The way Ethan's video is framed seems to imply that Israel's genocide in Gaza is not actually a genocide. He never explicitly uses the term himself, but it's presented as just another thing that's happening in the Middle East that's sad, but ultimately the product of a war. That there are deaths on both sides, and that all we need to have peace is rational dialogue between these two sides. This could not be further from the truth, and to better understand this, we need to talk about Gaza. Thus far, I've been using the term genocide in reference to Israel's actions in Gaza, but it seems like a lot of the people using it on social media here have a general lack of understanding of the gravity of what that term actually means. Genocide isn't just a bad thing that's happening where people are dying. No, that's not what it is. It's a Holocaust. The U.S.-Israeli Holocaust. That's what it should be called. Israel is using everything in its power to eradicate Palestinians from the planet. The fact that Israel's actions in Gaza amount to genocide isn't controversial, not among the experts.
Yeah, it's probably going to say exactly what I'm going to say, but the argument is a lot of times like, well, they haven't killed them all. You don't have to kill all of a ethnic group for it to be considered genocide. I mean, we've already gone over the International Criminal Court has convicted them of war crimes and convicted them of committing genocide. But what we have now is clear evidence, because not just killing a group, but ethnically cleansing them from an entire area is also considered genocide, or at the very least, ethnic cleansing. I don't want to harp on definitions of words too long, but they do have meaning and they do matter. We know now for a fact that the intention all along was to completely ethnically cleanse Palestinians from Gaza. And we know that now because Trump can never keep his mouth shut. He always says the quiet part out loud. And he said, yeah, they ain't coming back. We're going to develop that area. We're going to make it super nice. We're going to work with the Saudis and his buddy, the Crown Prince, and we're going to turn it into the new Riviera, the Gaza Riviera. And right on cue, Netanyahu supported Trump's statements, went right along with it. And when Trump was asked for clarity on it, about where the Gazas would go, where the Palestinians, the Gazans, would go during this reconstruction period, he said elsewhere. I think he may even have said the surrounding countries or the other Muslim countries. I don't remember exactly, but yeah, he said no, they're not going to be there. And then they even specifically asked him, well, are they going to come back? Are they going to be allowed to return? And he said no to that as well. So there's no arguing against. There's no, at this point in time, with everything that's happened and everything that's been said, they've bombed every school, they've bombed every hospital, they've bombed every piece of infrastructure in Gaza. The plan all along was to ethnically cleanse Palestinians from the Gaza Strip. There is absolutely no doubt about that whatsoever. It's undeniable at this point. They used to say oh, it's only going to be the north, and they're moving everybody to the south, and they'll be allowed to come back. And then they bombed the south too, and then they bombed everywhere. And now it's turned into no, they can't come back. So there's really just no denying it at this point. Anyways.
At least. This is the near universal consensus among top human rights groups and humanitarian organizations operating on the ground in Gaza that Israel is committing genocide, countless war crimes, and crimes against humanity. There is the Amnesty International report, a 300-page report that accused Israel of genocide in Gaza. There was the Human Rights Watch report accusing Israel of crimes against humanity and genocide in Gaza, specifically through the intentional deprivation of access to clean drinking water. The United Nations, Euromed Monitor, Doctors Without Borders, the International Committee of the Red Cross, Israeli human rights groups like B'Tselem, various Holocaust scholars, they're all saying the same thing. Last year, the International Court of Justice ruled that the case for Israel's genocide in Gaza.
And these are all well-respected groups that he mentioned right now. Very well-respected around the world. And you'll never hear Ethan talking about any of these groups or any of these reports. You'll never hear him bringing it up. He never talks about it. If you push him, he'll concede. I remember his chat was getting, when I was still watching him, his chat was getting mad at him because he wasn't calling for a ceasefire. And so after they pushed him and he was tired of hearing the pushback, he finally said, oh, okay, kind of sarcastically said, yeah, I'm calling for a ceasefire. And then of course never mentioned it again. And that was back in the early stages of the genocide still. So it's dude, you have to push this man to say anything pro-Palestinian at all. It's just ridiculous. And don't Steve Brunel or Aaron Brunel or something. I can't. Gosh, I'm gonna look it up and go over it again. But the man that self-immolated, which means lighting yourself on fire, unalived himself for the Palestinian cause to end the genocide. This man mocked and made fun of him right after. I believe the day after it happened. Ethan called this guy an idiot, just mocked him, just said horrible, disgusting things about him. You really think that's somebody that supports Palestine, that's going to make fun of somebody that sacrifices themselves just to bring awareness to the cause? I mean, tell me you're genocidal without telling me genocidal, Ethan. Jesus.
Gaza is plausible. It was a preliminary hearing, and the final rulings on cases of genocide typically take multiple years, but the ICJ issued several provisional measures to prevent the possibility of a genocide taking place, provisional measures which Israel has failed to follow completely. And then there was, of course, the International Criminal Court, who issued arrest warrants for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and former Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, who are now wanted international war criminals. Towards the start of
another side note, both Ethan and Ela said Yoav Gallant, who was the Ministry of Defense, who is the only other person in the Israeli government, apparently, that was convicted of genocide and war crimes by the International Criminal Court. They said he was a nice guy. They said he was a nice guy, and Benjamin Netanyahu fired him because he's such a nice guy, and he was a moderating voice in the genocide, so that's why he got fired. Obviously, that caused a lot of backlash, and Ela eventually apologized and said, I didn't mean that. I didn't mean to say that. Obviously, I wasn't thinking of his statements that he's made, because at the very beginning of the genocide, that dude said he was the one that called to cut off all water, all electricity, all food, all fuel, completely cut off Gaza from everything, which is a war crime to do that. All aid, everything. And in that same message, that same call for action, which was not just a call to action, but an actual order to the military, to the IDF, he called them animals too. He called the Palestinians animals when he was making that order. This is the person that they said is a nice guy and a moderating voice. If that's a moderating voice, I hate to hear what Netanyahu's saying, because he's clearly not the moderating voice. But it's just disgusting. You can't say stuff like this and then be upset when people are calling you a Zionist or calling you pro-genocide. You cannot get upset when you say things like that. And just because Ela walked it back, clearly they didn't mean it, because she still said, well, even though he's not a nice guy, I still think he was a moderating voice. And then later Ethan also doubled down on that and said, yeah, whatever, he was still a moderating voice. Like, basically acting like it was bullshit that they ever caught any heat for saying that in the first place. So it's like, dude, you have no remorse even when you say like horrible, horrible shit. So don't be surprised when people call you out for it. That's just how it works.
Of his video, Ethan mentions a death toll figure of 40,000 Palestinian people.
Of course, if you compare the raw numbers, Gazans have lost a lot more than Israelis. 40,000 people have died, and neighborhoods have been completely flattened during this war.
The figure he cites is wrong. It's just wrong. Credible estimates have placed the full scale of the slaughter in Gaza at over 65,000 deaths due to traumatic injury alone, with further projections that include indirect deaths in the hundreds of thousands, potentially over 10% of the population of Gaza. Ethan's brief and false citation leaves a lot of other things unmentioned, like how the vast majority of these deaths have been Palestinian civilians, including over 15,000 children. The United Nations described Gaza as a graveyard for children just months into the genocide, and after that, Israel only ramped up its child killing. Ethan does not mention that over 1,200 families have been completely erased from the Gaza civil registry, meaning that every single member of their bloodline has been killed. Nor does he mention that the mass slaughter of these innocent civilians has been intentional. Israel has a long history of intentionally targeting Palestinian civilians for slaughter. This dates back.
Yeah, like, I'll try to make this little side note quick, but the whole argument of like they use their own people as human shields, they use kids for human shields, that whole argument is such bullshit. I've never thought that held up. I mean, and then when people bring up good analogies, like when there's a school shooter in a school, you don't get to bomb the school and claim that they're using the kids as human shields, even if they're directly holding them as hostages as human shields. You have no right to kill those innocent children just to get to the terrorist, to get to the criminal. You know, and same thing. Look at a bank robbery. The bank robber's holding all the people hostage inside. It isn't ever an option. It's never on the table to bomb the entire building to get the bad guy and kill everyone inside. It's never, there's no other situation where this is acceptable except for in this genocide being committed by Israel. It's the only time it's allowed. And of course, stuff like this has happened in history. Sometimes people bring that up too, like the bombing in Dresden and stuff like that. Those were horrible acts. And those are the reasons that we came up with the, I can't remember the accords or whatever, but look, we've all agreed as a society that it's not okay to bomb civilians and kill civilians. And that isn't considered casualties of war. There is specific circumstances where casualties of war are considered legal, but those are under specific consequences. And it is not what Israel is doing. The numbers don't support these just being casualties of war. They just don't support it.
to the Nakba, the ethnic cleansing of over 700,000 Palestinians from their land in 1948, which included the massacre of thousands of civilians. And it's also evident in all of Israel's many previous violent incursions into Gaza specifically. During Operation Cast Lead, starting in late 2008 to 2009, Israel slaughtered about 1,400 Palestinian people. 300 of those were children. During this widespread massacre, Israel ordered people to shelter in schools, so-called humanitarian safe zones, then proceeded to bomb the schools and kill people by the dozens. This practice has continued at an even larger scale in the latest escalation in Gaza.
Firas, my brother Firas, he screams. The pain is overwhelming as corpses lie by his feet. These are the moments just after an Israeli strike on a school, sheltering thousands of displaced Palestinians.
During the 2018 border protests, or the Great March of Return, which were recognized by human rights organizations as being overwhelmingly peaceful, Israel fired on the peaceful crowds with sniper rifles, injuring thousands and killing hundreds. The UN reports concluded that Israeli snipers were intentionally targeting children, medics, pregnant women, and disabled people. Israeli snipers later publicly, gleefully, recounted their experiences of hunting Palestinians for sport, bragging about the number of kneecaps they could shatter. This trend has continued in Israel's latest escalation since October 7th to an extreme degree. IDF snipers are intentionally targeting children for execution by shooting them in the skull and in the heart. Healthcare workers have testified to seeing Israeli drones hovering outside of hospitals, picking off children. That's where they're shooting them and injuring them and then circling back to execute them.
What I think I found particularly disturbing was that a bomb would drop maybe on a crowded, tented area, and then the drones would come down and...
Please take your time. We're incredibly grateful.
So the drones would come down and pick off civilians, children. And we had description after description. This is not, an occasional thing. This was day after day after day.
It's so much easier for these cowards to shoot children like a video game while they're probably sitting in an office safe in Tel Aviv with joysticks and a computer and just they're playing a fucking video game when really they're just massacring children. I can't imagine anything more cowardly and disgusting than what these people are doing. It's just, there's no words for it. It's just horrible. This guy can barely even talk about it without breaking down.
Operating on children, he would say, I was lying on the ground after a bomb had dropped, and this quadcopter came down and hovered over me and shot me. And that's clearly a deliberate act, and it was a persistent act, persistent targeting of civilians day after day. We had 1 or 2 mass casualty incidents every day, and that meant 10 to 20 dead, 20 to 40 seriously injured.
Just hunting Palestinian children for sport. It's pure terrorism. The Israelis also have a history of murdering Palestinian civilians by running them over with bulldozers and tanks. Recall the story of the killing of Kamal Zair from April of 2002. Israeli tanks shot and killed him and then proceeded to run him over. He was 57 years old, wheelchair-bound, and waving a white flag. Another prominent case of this was Rachel Corrie, a 23-year-old American peace activist who was murdered by an Israeli bulldozer while protesting the destruction of Palestinian homes in Gaza. Israelis for years after her murder celebrated the day by making pancakes with Rachel Corrie's face painted into them. In the latest escalation, individual Israeli soldiers have admitted to committing these atrocities by the hundreds. The only reason...
Not only are they committing horrendous terrorist acts, but their society has normalized celebrating it, turning these events, and this is this is just killing an American that was defending Palestinians. Anyone that supports Palestinians in any way is open game for them. And they, not only are they committing terrorism, but they celebrate it and create holidays around it. And that's part of their normal culture. And they film it, they talk about it, and they admit it, because some of these people eventually their consciences catch up with them, and they admit this. It's the same thing with American soldiers that tortured people in Iraq. And, we find out about this stuff because eventually people feel bad about it and they can't live with themselves anymore. It's not everyone, but a lot of people can't live with themselves. And eventually they feel like they have to tell somebody. And that's how these stories come out.
The reason we have these admissions is because Western outlets have written articles with concerns over how the mass murdering affects these soldiers' mental health. Another element to the case that Israel is committing genocide is its continuous intentional deprivation of the basic necessities for life for Palestinians in Gaza. They've been using starvation as a weapon of war, a war crime, and a crime against humanity. Most recently, Israel's response to the quote-unquote ceasefire in Gaza is to continue this mass starvation while explicitly stating it as a matter of policy. They have blocked humanitarian aid throughout the genocide in violation of international law, the ceasefire orders, and the ICJ's provisional measures against genocide. The pretext they've fabricated for this policy of intentional starvation is that Hamas is looting these aid trucks. They have provided no evidence for this claim. What we do have evidence for is that Israel has protected and supported criminal gangs with ties to ISIS in areas that Israel has full control over, and these groups have been looting aid trucks. Israel is intentionally depriving Palestinians in Gaza of access to clean water. Oxfam reported that Israel has destroyed over 1,000 miles of water and sanitation networks, leaving less than 7% of pre-war water levels in Rafah and North Gaza. Israel has also partially or entirely destroyed over 80% of water and sanitation infrastructure in Gaza, including all 6 of its mainline wastewater treatment plants. Brutal, violent...
All part of taking out Hamas, right? They have to take out all the clean water and all the infrastructure. Just that's targeting Hamas, right? Those are legitimate military targets, right? No, those are war crimes, and that's terrorism. That's what it is.
Attacks on the healthcare system are another aspect of the genocide. They've damaged or destroyed every single hospital in Gaza and murdered countless medical workers, doctors, nurses, rescue workers, and healthcare staff. They've kidnapped doctors and held them without charge, where they've been tortured. Dr. Adnan al-Bursh, Gaza's leading orthopedic surgeon, was kidnapped by Israeli soldiers, brought to an Israeli prison, and then reportedly raped to death. The latest UN reports have concluded that over 90% of the buildings in Gaza have been severely damaged or completely destroyed. If you watch any of the footage coming out of Gaza, this is made quite clear. Israel's destruction includes every single school, hospital,
I mean, we've gotten used to images like this, but dude, look at that. I mean, this looks like video out of movies, like where the world has ended. Like when the machines have risen, the Terminators have won. They took over the world. Like, this is like horrendous. Like, it is just miles and miles and miles of rubble. Like, how can anyone look at this and say, yeah, that's what needed to happen. That's deserved. That's what these people had coming. Like, give me a break. Like, how desensitized do you have to be to look at this and think that this is normal or this is, like, justified war? Like, what war, bro? Like, I've watched war footage. I watch footage out of Ukraine and Russia, and you can look up that combat footage and you can see Ukrainian soldiers getting killed and you can see Russian soldiers getting killed. That's not what you see when you look up war footage of Israel and Gaza. It's just rubble. You don't see firefights among soldiers. They just carpet bomb the place into oblivion. It's just pure terrorism, pure genocide. Like, I cannot stress that enough.
Mosque, cultural center, church, residential areas, everything has been bombed. It's estimated that it will take a minimum of 15 years to remove the debris and unexploded ordinances from the Gaza Strip. That's just removing it, by the way, not rebuilding. In September, the UN released an estimate that because of Israel's illegal and inhumane blockade around Gaza, which regularly limits the transfer of things like concrete into the Strip, fully rebuilding Gaza will take 350 years. Gaza is about 25 miles long and 5 miles wide. It is one of the most densely populated areas.
350 years. Like, they bombed them into oblivion. That was the point. That is the point. They knew what they were doing. And it's ethnic cleansing, it's genocide, it's everything, all of the above. It's like, yeah, they didn't technically drop a nuke on them, but they dropped enough bombs to equal multiple nuclear bombs. So it's worse. Look, it's worse than dropping a nuke because it's the amount of bombs they've dropped is the equivalent of multiple nukes dropping. So it's like, yeah, we didn't nuke them, but they have discussed it, because that would be really nice if they could spread that radiation in there too. They would love that. Only problem with that is that would mess up their nice little plans of Trump's Riviera and mess up that beachfront property that they want to develop slowly or quickly, you know, considering they could throw as many resources at it as they want for the Israeli settlers or maybe U.S. settlers that they want to bring in. But it ain't going to work like that for the Gazans, and it isn't going to work like that for the Palestinians.
On Earth. It is in this area that Israel has dropped equivalent to that of multiple nuclear weapons. Israel has done this with full knowledge that over half the population of Gaza is children. So no, this isn't just a case where 40,000 people died. A lot more than that. happened. One of the most tragic elements of the Gaza genocide is that, as crucial as it may be for the factual record and eventually holding the perpetrators accountable, merely recounting these statistics does not afford Palestinians the dignity of humanity. They're simply reduced to numbers, to tens of thousands of names on a registry, as if they aren't human beings with dreams, hopes, hobbies, interests, and love for the people around them. If you've had this feeling as well, I want to recommend a book. It's called If I Must Die. It's written by renowned Palestinian poet, author, and teacher Dr. Rafat al-Arir. It's full of stories and poetry and history about life, or rather survival, in Gaza during occupation and genocide. It is beautifully written and humanizing beyond anything you'll ever get from most coverage of Gaza, especially in the West. I have a friend from Gaza. His name's Ahmed Sarsour, and he's a very talented poet. We got in contact on social media, and when I read his work, it moved me in a very similar way to the way Dr. Rafat's words have. Ahmed has a sister, Rania. She is a mother and a gynecologist from Gaza and is seeking help after being displaced in February of last year. She and her children were forced to flee their home, and her life was further devastated when her home and her family members' homes were destroyed. She gave birth to her baby, Rose, in a hospital without proper care and no anesthetic, and now faces a dire situation with limited resources. I've linked her fundraiser in the description. Support if you can. The funds raised will go towards essentials like diapers, baby formula, medicine, basic living items, rent, and travel expenses for relocation. Another friend of mine, Ahmed Matar, is a 27-year-old inventor from Gaza. He makes these brilliant videos showing the process of constructing creative inventions to use in order to survive in Gaza. After the so-called ceasefire was implemented, Ahmed and his family returned to their home in the north only to find that it had been looted, vandalized, and destroyed by the occupation forces. Support his campaign if you can. I will leave these fundraisers as well as a link to Dr. al-Arir's book in the description. The book is devastating, though, especially considering the fate of its author.
Yeah, of course he's going to mention that this man was targeted and killed, but I highly recommend anyone reading his book and or any book from a Palestinian. Expose yourself to a different point of view. Even if you think someone is your enemy, you should want to get to know your enemy, right? You should want to know your enemy. Everybody knows that. So even if you consider them an enemy or a terrorist, I highly recommend reading something that gives you their side of it, that gives you a different perspective, because a lot of times exposing yourself to other points of view can be very eye-opening. So I highly recommend it.
Rafat was killed by Israel in a targeted assassination in December of 2023. He was killed alongside his brother Salah, with his son Muhammad and his sister Asma and 3 of her children. This came after having over 30 members of his and his wife's family slaughtered by Israel over the course of their lives. What these numbers also fail to communicate is the weight and depth the effects of this crime has had and will continue to have for generations. To speak only of the children of Gaza, they will forever hold the wounds and trauma caused by Israel's genocide in their minds and hearts. It was reported that when asked, over half of the children in Gaza expressed a desire to die. Many of them already held such wounds, though, of course, but in terms of sheer scale and intensity, what we're seeing now is incomprehensible, except to those experiencing it. Throughout these 17 months of
it's crazy because I have to mentally block out that stuff. I have a very vivid, active imagination, and when they start talking about the kids don't even want to be alive, half of them, I have to I can't even allow my brain to go down that road. I mean, I have and I do in order to empathize, but in a situation right now where I'm trying to maintain to make a video or whatever, your brain has to block it out because it's so disgusting. To not get enraged and cry and get emotional when you hear about innocent children dying and innocent children wanting to not be alive because they live in such horrible conditions and their self-esteem is probably so low. Even right now, talking about it, I'm kind of disconnecting, disassociating to even be able to talk about it without losing it, just losing it.
genocide, the international community has left the people of Gaza to languish and die. If there's anything we've learned about Israel in the past 100 years, it's that there is no crime they can commit that won't go unpunished, up to and including genocide. In the latest escalation, again, the world has watched this happen and done nothing. And some have, of course, actively made this genocide possible. Most notably, that would be the United States government. The US and the Biden administration is fully complicit in this genocide. They've repeatedly sent billions of dollars in weapons shipments and provided military and diplomatic support. Over 80% of the killing machinery that has been used to slaughter Palestinians in Gaza has been provided by the United States government. They've also provided rhetorical and diplomatic support by whitewashing Israel's crimes against humanity, laundering Israeli atrocity propaganda, and denying and dismissing genocide allegations.
Yeah, that's another point I gotta make real quick is you always hear, especially on the Trump side of the MAGA land, I don't want no more billions of my taxpayer dollars going to fund no wars. Okay? And they're talking about Ukraine. Now stop sending that money to that Zelensky, man. He's a dictator. Putin's a great guy, but Zelensky's a dictator, man. He's bought his sixth mansion in Miami with all that taxpayer money we sent him. When mostly what we sent them is weapons in the form of aid. But they'll talk about the billions we sent to Ukraine, but I don't ever hear them talking about the billions we send to Israel every year to support their war efforts, to support their straight-up genocide. I thought you guys are saying you're for peace. They claim they're for peace, but not so much when it's a group that they don't really care for, right? Or when it's billions of dollars that we send to Israel every single year. And these people fully support it. They're all for it. I don't get what the difference is. If you're for peace, you got to be consistent with your peacefulness, right? You can't just be peace for Putin and not for the Gazans, right? Doesn't make sense. Be consistent. That's all I'm saying.
That last one should come as no surprise, given that a genocide ruling against Israel does also implicate the United States in the crime of aiding and abetting genocide, since they sent the bombs that made it possible. The ICC is already being urged to investigate Joe Biden and Antony Blinken for their role in perpetrating this very crime. These actions have shown the U.S. to be acting in violation of both domestic and international laws by sending weapons to a regime that is actively and intentionally blocking access to humanitarian aid against a civilian population that they are occupying, and ignoring the arrest warrants issued by the International Criminal Court against Netanyahu and Gallant. This is just another plot on the long chart of the US and Israel's position as rogue states in the international community. There's a comment I saw on Ethan Klein's video. It read, "I feel like a lot of people can't separate Israelis and the Israeli government, and the same with the other side. Like you are allowed to hate on the people who actually kill people and not hate the innocent adults and children that are being killed from both sides." This is a popular framing among liberals and liberal outlets, that we should separate the Israeli people from the actions of their government. While there are some examples from the past where this may be true, such as the case of the American public's attitudes towards the end of the Vietnam War, which diverged from their government, the same cannot be said in the case of Israel. The vast majority of the Israeli public supports this genocide. Months into the genocide, polling showed that over 95% of Jewish Israelis supported the IDF's actions with a...
And I just want to say real quick as he's going into this that pointing out this fact, which he's about to support with a lot of evidence, does not mean that you're an advocate or that you're advocating or that you want Israelis to be murdered or genocided for these beliefs. It just means you want them to change these beliefs, and you want them to change their government if they can, if possible, not support the genocide full-throatedly. You know, just like there was mass protests against the Vietnam War, we should be seeing the same thing in Israel. And even if we don't, that doesn't mean that we're saying, oh well, they need to be genocided. The Israelis need to be genocided. That's not what anyone's saying. Okay? Just like pointing out Ethan's faults and criticizing Ethan does not mean that I wish harm upon him or that I think anyone should harass him in real life. I don't think anybody should do anything like that. But I don't think he should be above criticism, and neither should the Israeli government, and neither should the Israeli people if they are supporting genocide. It's really that simple. Bada bing, bada boom.
A majority of those indicating that the IDF was not using enough force in Gaza. The force in question there being, genocide. They wanted more. It wasn't enough, apparently. 17 months later, and nothing has really changed. Just weeks ago, polling indicated that the Trump administration's plan to facilitate the ethnic cleansing of Gazans was supported by over 80% of Israelis. This headline refers to Israelis as a whole, but that 80% support statistic is actually only the perspective of Jewish Israelis. A majority of Palestinians with Israeli citizenship, or Arab Israelis, as the Israeli government tries to call them, considers this ethnic cleansing plan to be immoral. When it comes to Jewish Israelis, however, that number drops to just 3%. This should come as no surprise, given Israel's history. A country that exists on the logic of ethnic supremacy and colonization requires a certain level of dehumanization to keep its inhabitants from collapsing under the weight of the reality of their rotten society. Another way to get a handle on the seemingly...
Again, this is just the natural sort of result of creating an ethno-state that teaches and propagandizes supremacy and dehumanizes people in the out-group, just like Trump and immigrants. I got no problem if you want to see immigration have more responsible regulation. If you see problems with immigration, I have no issue with that. Let's fix the problem, right? Let's address the problem and let's fix the problem. We can discuss that. I got no problem with that. At no point during that process of creating a solution do we need to dehumanize the immigrants, right? We don't need to hate fellow humans in order to fix a problem that we have in our country. There's no reason for that. The only reason is to drum up support and hatred so that when you do horrible things to this group, you'll have support for it. And that's exactly what happened on a large scale since the very inception of Israel, because they had to be able to justify the fact that they were removing all the people in this land so that the Israelis could move in. So they had to create a narrative around that and dehumanize the people they were kicking out. That way the people they were moving in wouldn't revolt or feel bad about what they were doing. So having an ethno-state is one problem. And then you make that problem even worse when you start dehumanizing. I cannot say that word. I want to say it as two words for some reason. That's what really takes it to another level, and that's when you get things like genocide being okay. And you do have ethno-states in the Muslim world around there, but the difference being that they're not, those are historically Muslim regions, and even though they do suffer a lot of the negative aspects of being, religious-based ethno-states, their people accept it for the most part, not in every country, because of the fact that there's no otherizing. They didn't kick one group of people out, at least not in the recent times in modern history, to get their land, right? So there is a difference there. And also the other thing to keep in mind is like a lot of these biggest countries, even though they were like majority Muslim for going back, hundreds of years, like Iran, for instance, was a much more liberal society. It wasn't this like radical jihadist version of Islam that was going on, and it was in fact the United States intervening and installing a more radical government in Iran because it benefited the U.S. at the time to have a more radical group in there, and in different parts of the Middle East for various geopolitical reasons. But the thing that people don't realize is like they were on a natural progressive track as well. Like modern societies that educate their people and move through, like the radical political beliefs tend to fade away. The fundamentalism tends to fade away. And yes, just like there's a lot of Muslims in America that live just like the rest of us, except for maybe some of them wear hijabs or whatever. Other than that, they're just like the rest of us, and they're not under Sharia law or anything. It's just, and even Sharia law, that can be interpreted in different ways. And basically what I'm saying is like, even Iran and some of these other countries weren't as radical as they are now if it weren't for outsiders coming in and fucking with them and causing them to be more radical and causing them to be more defensive of outsiders. That's kind of the natural result when you keep poking, keep prodding, keep poking the bear. In Israel, you have a different situation where they created an ethno-state out of thin air in the middle of a bunch of Muslim countries. And yes, there was Jewish people that lived in the area alongside Palestinians for many, many years, but they were the minority. And that was okay. That shows you that Jewish people can safely live as a minority in Muslim lands if you don't have this apparatus, this terrorist organization coming in and slaughtering and genociding Muslims. If you take that element away, people can live in peace. It's that simple. At this point, it's not going to happen overnight, but it's not impossible. And that's what people like Ethan try to make it. They try to make it seem like it's impossible for Muslims and Jewish people to ever live side by side peacefully, or Muslim or Jewish people and Palestinians. He makes it seem like it's impossible. But he's pro-Palestinian, right? Yeah. What does that mean for him exactly? I really would like to hear him fully break it down and fully define what exactly being pro-Palestinian means to him. I would like to hear him really break it down and hear a description that's more than 2 or 3 sentences long and involves more than I donated to a charity one time and I say I'm pro-Palestinian and I said ceasefire one time. What else do you got, Ethan, other than that? What else makes you pro-Palestinian? Tell us. I'd love to hear it. I'd love to hear a real breakdown, Anyhow.
Ubiquitous genocidal fervor among Israelis is by just talking to them.
How many civilians have been killed in Gaza, from what you know?
Who gives a shit?
Okay, but don't you feel like, for example, children?
Who gives a shit? That was her response. Who gives a shit? Now, no one's saying she represents everybody, but we know the statistics. And it's fascinating that she's willing to just say that openly, knowing she's on video. Jeez.
Children grow up to be Arabs. I read the numbers last week. My memory died and went.
Whoa! Children grow up to be Arabs. You wouldn't want that. You can't have people growing up and becoming Arabs. You can't have that. No. Jeez, man, listen to what this. I mean, she just looks like a cute, innocent old lady. You would never guess that she's saying these absolutely horrendous, genocidal shit. She's talking about murdering children. She is a cold-blooded, genocidal maniac. There's no other way to look at it. Holy shit, lady, you are crazy, man.
To heaven. I don't think children should suffer, but they're always casualties. And since they do a lot of pru-urvu, that is a natural result.
חפים מפשע נהרגו בעזה.
טוב, אז כנראה שנעצור.
ואת לא רוצה לענות על זה?
תודה.
אוקיי, אפשר לשאול למה?
כי אני לא חושבת שיש מישהו שהוא...
Hold on. Let me move it so we can see. Let me move it.
שהוא חף פשע שם.
אבל ילדים נגיד.
תודה.
אוקיי, אפשר לשאול למה? עזה.
That is a natural result.
חפים מפשע נהרגו בעזה.
טוב, אז כנראה שנעצור.
ואת לא רוצה לענות על זה?
תודה.
אוקיי, אפשר לשאול למה?
כי אני לא חושבת שיש מישהו שהוא חף פשע שם.
Okay, so it looked like she was going to have a little self-control there and not say something horrendous on video. But she went ahead and said there's no one innocent there. No children. She knows there's a bunch of children there. No one's innocent. And then she does a big smile. What was she going to say that she doesn't want to be on camera? She's willing to say that on camera. A big old smile. Big happy smile. Nobody's innocent in Gaza. Not a single person. Not a single child. Not one. Okay, lady.
אבל ילדים נגיד.
הילדים מסכנים, אין ספק, אבל הם לא יגדלו להיות ילדים חפים מפשע, לצערי.
Most of the kids there that are getting killed, I never support little children dying, I never want it. But most of them will grow up not only supporting Hamas, which is a crime by itself, but joining them, which is the worst of the worst.
פשע נהרגו בעזה.
לא, זה גם...
Bruh, that is literally Ethan. He won't, he tries to not say that last part out loud. He tries to not really talk about that second part. But that's exactly what he believes. That guy was 100% Ethan's been. Oh, and I don't want to see anyone suffer. Children, I don't ever want to see people suffer. I don't want. And really, what he's saying is yeah, I don't want to see it. I'm not gonna look at it. I'm not gonna look at the children suffering. I'm gonna ignore it. I'm not gonna see it. But I'm okay with it happening. It's okay. I'm cool with it. I'm cool with them getting bombed. I'm cool with them getting murdered. But of course, yeah, it's horrible. Nobody wants to see children suffer. other than like the Israelis that set up all the couches and chairs along the edge of Gaza so they can watch the bombings at night. They sit there with popcorn and it's like a big family fun event to like watch the city and the children get bombed into oblivion. It's a nice Thursday night, Saturday night movie night for them.
לא מעניין אותי.
לא? למה?
לא מעניין אותי, אני הייתי עד 7 באוקטובר האמנתי בשלום ובשיח ובדו-שיח. אחרי זה הבנתי שאין לי מי לדבר, כולם שם מחבלים. לצערי הרב.
אבל ילדים, כאילו.
לא, אני אומרת בכנות, לא מעניין אותי.
There is no.
She's being honest. She doesn't care. It's almost like October 7th was like had a very specific political agenda to sort of be like the last dehumanizing event to take place. And it's like, okay, well, that's the Palestinians' fault, right? Or that's Hamas's fault, right? But most people in Israel blame Netanyahu for that happening. And, you know, I don't know when more, some info, it's not something people are really looking at right now because it's not the most relevant thing. But most people in Israel blame Netanyahu for October 7th. And I won't be surprised if there was like intentionality in letting it happen. Because Netanyahu was facing so much pressure to get out of office. And what keeps a president or a prime minister in office other than a major terror attack or war? It seemed like very convenient timing for that all to take place when it did. And it's very strange how there was like no defense. Like even the Hamas soldiers were like talking about how surprised they were by like how far in to Israel proper they were able to go and how long they were able to carry out their attack before there was any real pushback. Just something to think about. Just something to think about.
Such things Palestinians. They're Arabs who have many countries to flee to and nobody wants them to. But if we do call them Palestinians, their parents use them as human shields to gain sympathy. The natural instinct of a Jewish mother is to protect her child. Palestinian women do not have that.
These people know that they're on camera and that
Okay, and then that's just pure racism. That she's basically saying that like Jewish women are just naturally better than Palestinian women. Like that is pure racism. You think these people are not human in the same way that you are human. You think of them as animals, as lower than you. And that's the point, right? That's the point of these years and years of propaganda from the Israeli government, is to drill it into their heads that Palestinians are not people. They're not humans. They don't deserve the same treatment or the same rights as Israelis. That is their honest belief. And it's not racist for me to point that out. It's not anti-Semitic for us to point that out and to call that out. She can change her mind at any time. Racism is based on your ethnic background, which is something you cannot control. That woman can control her beliefs. She can change her beliefs. Palestinians cannot change where they come from. They cannot change what their culture is. Okay? So it's not the same thing. Going back to like Ethan blatantly saying, like calling them out for their genocidal beliefs, calling that out is anti-Semitic to him. Like, shut the fuck up, dude. You are so full of shit. It just enrages me how stupid he is.
these remarks will be posted on the internet or shared on the mainstream news. This is normal to them. This is normal in their society, which is a testament to the fact that their society is not normal. It's typically bad form to cite street interviews as being some meaningful indicator of widespread attitudes. But again, with Israel, it's just different. Not just because these attitudes align perfectly with the wider Israeli polling data, but also because it's almost impossible to find anyone in Israel saying anything else. The amount of truly anti-Zionist Israelis living in Israel numbers in the hundreds. This figure is according to anti-Zionist Israelis themselves. They are alone.
Everyone around us are completely genocidal maniacs. Everyone around you. And I don't mean it metaphorically. It's not metaphorically. It's literally everybody. It will be your family. It will be your teachers. It will be your colleagues. Everyone around you. So you're alone. Even if we will gather all of those anti-Zionists together from Jerusalem or Tel Aviv or Haifa or whatever, it will not be more than, I don't know, 500?
There's no tangible internal opposition within the country. The Israeli left is a myth. This is reflected once more in the openly genocidal sentiment we see on social media from IDF terrorists who have been willingly, gleefully, posting their own war crimes on the internet for everyone to see for a year and a half.
They go into the homes of Palestinians, and they're often clearly staying there, and they just smash them up, and they film themselves smashing them up. They also delight in going through women's underwear drawers, and this is a sort of recurring obsession. You have to see Israeli soldier videos in the context of the broader output of Israeli society.
If you gave me a button to just erase Gaza, every single living being in Gaza would no longer be living tomorrow, I would press it in a second. I would press it right now. Give me that button. I'd press it right now.
There you go.
And I think most Israelis would.
There's an Israeli song called This Was My Home. And what they would do is dress up as caricatures of obviously what they perceive Palestinians to be, being sung mockingly to people who no longer have homes. We're not looking at some sort of obscure subculture within Israeli society. This is mainstream Israeli society.
People have been keeping tabs on this. There are a number of archives documenting the names and crimes of these Israeli terrorists. One of the most thorough of these databases was created by historian Lee Mordecai. It's called Bearing Witness to the Israel-Gaza War. It is presently over 120 pages long with extremely detailed footnotes. There's that one tweet that's like, hitting translate from Hebrew on Twitter is like discovering a lost page from Mein Kampf. This holds up pretty well. Here, let's try it on this tweet. The survivors of the 2025 Holocaust are proof that every trace of the murderous mutations in Gaza must be erased, from delivery rooms to the last elderly person in Gaza. 100% dead in Gaza. That there is Barashi Kinneret, the host of a mainstream Israeli news channel. One more example that I found particularly striking was the right to rape protests. A group of Israeli prison guards were placed under investigation after security camera footage leaked showing them gang raping a Palestinian prisoner. The Israeli public reacted in uproar, not because of what they were alleged to have done, but because they were potentially going to be punished for it. Protests were held outside of the prison, attended by top Israeli officials. Mainstream Israeli news channels brought on one of the alleged rapist soldiers for interviews, supporting him and his right to kill and rape Palestinian hostages. Again, this wasn't some extremist fluke. It was reflected in broader polling of the Israeli public. According to a poll taken around that time, 65% of Israeli Jews oppose criminal prosecution for soldiers suspected of raping Palestinian detainees. And 47% of Jewish Israelis answered that Israel does not need to abide by international law and maintain moral values in the war. Simply put, it's a genocidal society, top to bottom. Perhaps the most complicit party to enabling this genocide, aside from the material support of Western governments, is the Western media. As previously mentioned, this support largely takes two forms: the more overt kinds, like spreading misinformation and explicit Israeli state and IDF propaganda, and the other, more subtle, yet significantly more frequent and effective, is that of manufacturing consent. Reporting on Palestinians has some clear differences in coverage, language, and framing when compared with other groups. In the first 100 days after Russia's invasion of Ukraine, 262 children were killed. In the first 100 days of Israel's assault on Gaza, more than 10,000 children were killed. The true number is likely much higher, but mentions of child deaths and related terms were 33.4% higher for Ukraine than for Gaza. During this time frame, CNN mentioned child victims of the war 2,446 times for Ukraine versus 2,110 times for Gaza, and MSNBC mentioned child victims of the Ukraine war 1,775 times versus 1,522 times for Gaza. This means that for each child death from Ukraine, children received the equivalent of 16.1 mentions on air, whereas children in Gaza received the equivalent of 0.36 mentions. MSNBC did not run a single segment in the first 100.
Okay, I mean, the point here is like it's not a contest, right? He's just pointing out the media bias. It's not like harping on the numbers specifically. It's just pointing out that like obviously the media is manufacturing consent around one war to a certain direction, and another conflict, or frankly a genocide, they're manufacturing consent in a different direction. And it's just pointing out that severe imbalance. It's not about a race to talk about children dying or who's talking about children dying more versus Ukraine or Israel. It's equally important in both countries. No innocent children should be killed in either country. But pointing out the media bias and the massive difference in coverage is important. I think it's very important to point that out. That's all he's doing here.
100 days that focus specifically and exclusively on the plight of children in Gaza. MSNBC ran over a dozen segments focusing specifically on the plight of Ukrainian children during the first 100 days of that conflict. Emotive language was barely ever used to describe the killing of Palestinians. This comes despite the vastly higher death toll over the same period. On CNN and MSNBC, the words war crime and genocide were mentioned 17 times more in the context of Ukraine than in the context of Gaza. Ukrainian victims were labeled as subject to war crimes or genocide 1,790 times compared to just 104 mentions for Palestinians. And we still see this now, obviously. During the hostage exchanges as a result of the latest so-called ceasefire, for example, you may notice that Palestinians detained without charges in Israeli jails, of which there are thousands, they are referred to as prisoners, whereas the IDF soldiers, that is, actual militants that were captured by Hamas on October 7th, are referred to as hostages. One of the greatest tweets of all time that I've ever seen described the capture of an IDF terrorist during October 7th as him being kidnapped from a tank. Kidnapped from a tank. Kidnapped from a tank. Coverage has been focused almost exclusively on the condition of these IDF quote-unquote hostages, rarely making mention of Israel.
Yeah, it's interesting how they will call this a war, but when the Palestinian side takes prisoners of war, POWs, they're called hostages. Now they took civilians as well, and those are definitely hostages, but they don't differentiate between the soldiers and the civilians. The Western media and the Israeli media don't differentiate between the two, and I know, and it works. It works because I've never talked to anybody in the West that's talking about Palestinians and referring to POWs. Like, they'll call it a war, but everything the Palestinian side does is they refer to as terrorism. They don't take POWs; they take hostages. It's just another example of the double standard and the manufactured consent that we get from the media in both the countries.
Israel's contribution to their condition, like how they starve out the population of Gaza, which obviously affects all of the people in Gaza, including the Israeli hostages in Gaza, or the fact that they rain airstrikes on them all day, every day for 16 months straight. Is that good for your health? Is that healthy? The same cannot be said of coverage of the Palestinian hostages. Despite emerging from these Israeli jails with clear evidence of extreme physical abuse, images of the Palestinian hostages are rarely, if ever, shown. The assumption is just granted. It's relied on that they're terrorists, criminals, and whatever else. So whatever happens to them, that's just what happens in jail. The Western media lies in other subtle ways, like burying the lead in stories and deceptively framing headlines. This is especially apparent in coverage of things like ceasefire negotiations. These outlets have consistently framed the lack of agreement to terms as being Hamas's fault, that they won't agree to Israel's terms, but they interestingly decide to use only one definition of the ceasefire agreement, which is Israel's definition, that being one which is only temporary, with no guarantees that the genocide will end after these temporary pauses. They're not really ceasefires, but in order to frame Hamas as disagreeing with them, that's what they have to call them. The ceasefire that ended up being agreed upon in January was the exact same ceasefire that Hamas had agreed to over 6 months prior. Israel continually sabotaged these negotiations, but if you read any of these mainstream outlets, you wouldn't know that, not until the very end of these articles, at least. The latest reporting on these negotiations continued this trend of misleading coverage, such as this story from early February. The majority of the article, headline included, frames Hamas as the instigator to a potential ceasefire failure. However, both independent observers and Israeli officials themselves acknowledged that it was actually Israel who had already broken the terms of the ceasefire agreement immediately after it was implemented. To anyone with a brain and eyes, this would be apparent given the evidence we have of these violations, but because these outlets didn't show their readers that and also prioritize the input of party committing genocide, this citation here is crucial for its readers. They need to see this to understand what's happening. But the New York Times waited to mention it until 9 paragraphs in, like basically the end of the article. This is a textbook example of bearing the lead, but it also goes beyond that into just a lie, right? The entire article is framed in precisely the opposite way of what this confirmed fact revealed. If the Times weren't running cover for a genocide, the headline of this article would read, Israel violates ceasefire, confirmed by Israeli officials. Probably the most insane example of this sort of thing is the following headline, once again from the New York Times. Lebanon ceasefire appears to hold despite Israeli strike. If Israel struck, they violated the ceasefire. The ceasefire did not hold. Israel violated it. It's just absurd. The genocide is referred to almost exclusively as the Israel-Hamas war. Like the Nazi Holocaust, Israel's genocide in Gaza has been conducted under the pretext of war, but the genocide aspect, of which there is, again, broad consensus has taken place, is omitted from this framing. Every single article that mentions this so-called war should be immediately citing the expert consensus that it really is not just a war, that it's a genocide. That doesn't happen, though. Trump recently made a number of statements explicitly supporting U.S. assistance to the ethnic cleansing of Gaza, including land development by U.S. companies. One tool I found helpful to compare these differences in this sort of coverage is Ground News, who are also the sponsor of today's video. The coverage from right-wing outlets such as Red State frames the comments as explicitly positive. Trump and Netanyahu unveiling a bold plan for Gaza and peace. On Ground News, this outlet has a low factuality tag, which means that they often omit key details. Some liberal to left-leaning outlets like New York Magazine, an outlet with a high factuality label indicating they typically rely on well-researched reporting, did explicitly call Trump's proposed plan a case of ethnic cleansing. Other left-leaning outlets centered the extreme nature of his language in the headlines, such as The Intercept, with an article titled "Trump, the U.S. will take over the Gaza Strip," or the proposed plan's effect on Palestinians, like Middle East Eye, with their article headlined "We'll own it. Trump wants to make Gaza a holiday hub without Palestinians." Ground News is an app and website that lets you compare media coverage across political biases while calculating each source's reliability so you can see how framing shapes public perception from sources around the world. Without understanding the different biases behind the news you read, you might not realize how skewed the narrative is. Unlike other platforms, Ground News is independent and nonpartisan, so they have no stake in promoting any agenda, just the facts and how those facts are presented. It's not always about how a story is spun, but equally important, participated in the right to rape protests we talked about earlier, protesting the Israeli right to rape and murder Palestinian hostages. These events were summarized by the New York Times as unrest. They were framed around the protest's effect on the party that was doing the protest, that is, again, the right to rape protest, and not on the fact that Israeli guards raped a Palestinian hostage, it was captured on video, and that the case was clear-cut enough that they actually called for an investigation for once, unlike 99% of previous cases of the IDF abusing, raping, torturing, and murdering Palestinians. In this article, the guards' actions against the Palestinian hostage are described vaguely and passively as just abuse, and it is not revealed until the very end of the article that the abuse took the form of the guards raping the man with an object. The follow-up story on the prosecution of these soldiers uses this same disgusting framing. Rape with an object is whitewashed in the headline and most of the article as simply just being abuse. This is yet another case of the framing of false neutrality, as this quote-unquote divide between the Israeli right and the Israeli left in this article doesn't actually exist. In reality, all that divide means is that the Israeli right are pro-rape and murder of Palestinian detainees, and the Israeli left thinks it makes their country look bad. There's no real debate going on here. A personal favorite of mine for its sheer absurdity was an article from the New York Times called "It Can Be Lonely to Have Middle-of-the-Road Opinions on the Middle East," which focused on college students that were seeking space for nuanced perspectives on the Israel-Hamas war. The perspective presented in this article is one-sided. They talk about extremism in student movements, but the only example they give for this point is that of the extremist Palestinian activists. The New York Times calls it a war with no reference to the numerous credible allegations of genocide. It's harder to justify having a conversation about nuanced opinions of genocide, so they just call it a war. There's no nuance in genocide. There's nothing progressive about genocide. This tendency to falsely frame a genocide with neutrality will often slip into outright endorsement. Recall Israel's pager terrorist attack in Lebanon when they detonated over 1,000 pagers rigged with explosive. This was a widespread mass terrorist attack that indiscriminately targeted civilians and left hundreds dead and permanently injured and disfigured, including a number of children.
أول شيء أنا كنت إنه قاعد عم بلعب على التليفون وهي إنه فجرت الساعة 3 إنه قبل ما أنا أحملها عم بلعب على التليفون هيك صار.
Right. This is another thing. This is just straight up terrorism. It is one of the biggest terrorist attacks in history. One of the most widespread, indiscriminate terrorist attacks in history. And I heard people like Destiny, like, damn, that was cold. That was dang, thank God. I'm basically complimenting. I'm like, wow, that's amazing. You guys are cool, so awesome. And it's crazy how the media covered this. It should just be covered as a terrorist attack. That's all it was. And it should make everyone in the U.S. worry about what Israel could do to us or what Israel is capable of as a government, because this is crazy shit that they can do. And I heard different stories that they were modified, and then I heard other stories that they're able to just program these devices to do this. I don't know. It's the craziest thing I've ever heard, and it's one of the craziest terrorist attacks, if not the craziest terrorist attack I've ever heard of, just because of the tactics and the indiscriminate way that it was carried out was just absolutely horrendous. And of course, it was really just a blip in the media. They talked about it for a few days, and then no one was talking about it anymore. But could you imagine if this happened to America? Any group at all did this in America? There would not be any dispute whatsoever over whether this was a terrorist attack or not. This is the definition of terrorism. If this isn't terrorism, I don't know what is. I really don't. It's literally meant to like inspire fear in an entire country, an entire population. Imagine what Lebanon thinks now. Imagine what the PTSD is like. You're afraid probably to use any appliance in your house. I won't be surprised if there's Lebanese people that are afraid to use electronics after that at all. Like they're probably afraid their TV might blow up, their DVD player, whatever. The PTSD. Imagine that. Imagine going into your house and being afraid to use any of the electronics in your house because it might blow you the fuck up. I don't think anybody can really comprehend in the Western world what that's like. To be able to walk into your house and be scared of all the electronic devices. That sounds like something out of a sci-fi movie. But that's a very real fear that pretty much everyone in Lebanon has to live with now. And really the entire Muslim world in that whole region, anybody that might be considered an enemy to Israel, probably lives with that fear now. So that is terrorism. Like maybe the death count itself isn't like the biggest terrorism attack, but if you think of the mental effects and the fear that created, and it was probably the widest scale amount of fear that's ever been able to be spread at once. So like that is pure terrorism on the highest level. Like it's disgusting.
بتترندرني غريبة أم أنا إنه قمت حملتها حطيت لي ايرور وسهم إنه عشان أكبس أوكي والضوء صار يغبش على الآخر يعني عشان نقربها على عيوننا أم أنا قربت عشان نشوف شو فيه بس فقعت ما عرفت شي.
Among those murdered was Fatima Abdullah, a 9-year-old girl. At her funeral, as well as other funerals with large crowds of people, Israel detonated more of these explosives. Despite this being a child-killing and maiming indiscriminate terrorist attack in violation of international law, in Western liberal media it was presented as a cool James Bond-style operation. It was described using words like ambitious, sophisticated, and daring.
The Israeli spy agency Mossad launched one of the most daring and sophisticated deceptions in the history of counterintelligence.
An extraordinary act of espionage, an example of Israel's technological prowess. According to the New York Times, the attack restored the aura of Israel's intelligence agencies. Before covering the attack, these outlets always, of course, make sure to mention Hezbollah's U.S. designation as a terrorist organization. Don't worry, guys, they were just terrorists, nothing to see here. We got the bad guys. They were bad, we are good, mission accomplished. And of course, as we've touched on a couple times, lying by omission, that's another thing. With every previous example, you see it. The Israeli hostages receive wall-to-wall coverage with no mention of the fact that the majority of the deaths of these hostages were a product of the Israeli military through airstrikes or firing on hostages while they were waving white flags, or that on October 7th, Israel issued the Hannibal Directive, killing likely many hundreds of its own civilians as a matter of official policy. One of the really effective propaganda strategies that results from these lies by omissions comes in the case of genocide allegations. Western outlets rarely, if ever, actually mention the numerous allegations of genocide levied against Israel. The few times that they do, they're often brief, unspecific, and accompanied with equivocation or lengthy citations of Israel's defense against the allegations. When the New York Times covered the Amnesty International genocide report, the subheading immediately backtracks into running cover for Israel. Israel rejected the charge, the first of its kind by a major human rights organization, saying it was based on lies. The Times went on to spend more of the article sharing the IDF's defense against the allegations than any of the findings from the actual report. Amnesty International gave us 300 pages of facts about genocide. Israel says that they're just lies. I guess we'll never know what happened here. That's not journalism, that's propaganda. When Human Rights Watch released their report accusing Israel of committing crimes against humanity and genocide through its deliberate deprivation of access to clean drinking water, readers of the New York Times wouldn't have heard about that because the New York Times just didn't report it. That's one of the top human rights organizations in the world, accusing the #1 ally of the most powerful country in the world of the crime of all crimes. And they just forgot? No, they didn't forget. The editorial staff at the New York Times knows that they've helped this. They know that they are complicit in this. So any chance they get to just sort of forget to mention something as consequential as a genocide allegation from the leading human rights group in the world, they'll do it. Of course they will. This tracks with the BBC's repeated genocide denial, evident in repeated instances of reporters condemning or correcting guests for using the word genocide to describe Israel's actions in Gaza.
Israel would deny that a genocide is taking place, saying that it is defending its right to exist. Its very existence, indeed, they would say, is under threat. So there are obviously two sides to this.
This whole issue of right of self-defense has allowed Israel to inflict the mass murder and mass destruction, what the ICJ now describe as plausible genocide. This is not an act of
you know what I'm going to have to say. I'm going to say Israel denies that. They say that they were in pursuit of Hamas terrorists who hid behind their own people.
This is a genocide happening in front of our eyes.
We have, that word is, as you know, incredibly emotive, and the Israelis, as you know, will be saying that they are targeting Hamas only, that they don't target civilians.
Not the truth, unfortunately.
Planned, military incursions.
Yes, but it's not the truth.
Yes, civilians are dying.
Civilians are dying, and the way that the bombs are getting dropped, I don't believe are in a targeted way. Nothing from what I'm hearing on the ground suggests that the bombs have been dropped in a targeted way. Our social media manager, all 5 houses around him got blown up. They estimate 100 people were killed in them. Yesterday, his house was the last one remaining in the neighborhood. They leveled an entire neighborhood.
Thank you very much. And I do need to make that qualification, of course, that it is always denied by the Israelis that genocide is taking place. They say these are strategic planned strikes in Gaza and that they are targeting the militant group Hamas.
I mean, it's just disgustingly clear that even the reporters that are saying that don't believe it. You can tell by her tone and the way she's like, they will say that that's not what they're doing. They say, because she doesn't want it to be mistaken that she's saying it. But it's very clear from her that her bosses are telling her to counter the genocide narrative. But it's very clear that they don't even believe what they're saying. Like, the plot gives itself away. The narrative gives itself away because the people being forced to push the narrative, they're not even convinced. They don't even believe what they're saying. So it's like, it's just so obvious. Like, it's so disgusting. And then they just cut these people off, and all they're doing is just reporting the facts. Like, you can't level an entire city and then say it's a targeted attack. That's not journalism. That's a lie. That's propaganda. You're a liar. You are lying. You are not a journalist. You are a propagandist. That's it.
But I'm here to let the world know that that's not the case.
Kareem, you've been able to have your say. This is what the Israelis will always say in response to that.
This effort to whitewash and run cover for the genocide has been intentional, of course, and we have the proof. It's been confirmed with direct evidence and testimony, with internal newsroom memos from not only the BBC, but the New York Times as well. And the last thing to talk about is just atrocity propaganda. One of the primary justifications for the genocide in Gaza is that members of Hamas are not just militants, but that they are monsters, pure evil motivated by nothing more than the sadistic hatred of Jews. This narrative has been fueled by stories of horrors that supposedly took place on October 7th. Hamas burned babies in ovens.
They burnt babies alive?
They put children and burned them to death.
They cut the breasts off of women.
400 women shot in the genitals, their breasts cut off as terrorists played with their bloody breasts like a football.
They cut off the breasts of women and throw them around.
They beheaded 40 babies.
I never really thought that I would see and have confirmed pictures of terrorists beheading children.
I hear people talking about all of this stuff all the time. Not once has evidence ever been shown. And in fact, all of these stories have been completely debunked. And not from outsiders, not from Palestinians, from the Israeli media, Israeli journalists themselves, who are, much of them, probably okay with the genocide, but also have some journalistic integrity, have debunked all of these stories. It's all lies. Every last one of these, every one of these stories. I'm not saying that no sexual assault occurred or anything like that, or nobody got beheaded. I'm just saying there's no evidence for any of these stories. No, and there was no forensic evidence or confirmed rape happened at all. And in fact, like, virtually every story of rape has been debunked. It doesn't mean that it didn't happen, because oftentimes in war, in these situations, the sexual assault does happen. It's just that you can't claim something happened without evidence, and they don't have evidence. They don't have any confirmed evidence of any of these stories, not one. And if anybody wants to challenge it, we can go through each story one by one and debunk it.
They behead children.
They cut the fetus out of the womb of a pregnant woman. They committed a campaign of systematized mass rape.
There is no justification for collective rape.
What happened on October 7th was mass, systematic, planned rape and genital mutilation of women.
All of these claims are false, complete fabrications, full stop. No credible evidence has been provided for any of them. Many were shown to be deliberately fabricated, and despite this, they were spread far and wide and ultimately used as rhetorical justification to continue the genocidal onslaught in Gaza. The first major place this narrative broke was Screams Without Words, a front-page New York Times story in late December of 2023. This story came as Israel's actions in Gaza were starting to receive widespread condemnation from the international community. The story was thoroughly debunked. The person who wrote it discredited as being a genocidal Zionist with no history history of reporting and self-admitting that the New York Times pushed for this story to come to the public despite the lack of credible evidence. The New York Times podcast, The Daily, shelved the episode due to a lack of credible evidence, but the New York Times never retracted the story, which is because they had no real pressure to do so. The false narrative had already prevailed, and that narrative was consistent with the status quo of the American empire, for whom they are running cover. In July of last year, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu repeated some of these lies in front of Congress. He received a standing ovation. 3 weeks later, the White House approved a $20 billion military aid package to Israel. They explicitly cited Netanyahu's visit as one of their motivations for doing so. Atrocity propaganda has consequences. So with that context out of the way about the Gaza genocide and its support from the West and within Israel, the broader media system that allowed it to happen, let's now return to Ethan's video. In the content nuke, you can find just about every type of what we just looked at in terms of manufacturing consent. Ethan spreads atrocity propaganda. He shares the Hamas mass rape hoax, the same hoax that was used by the Western media, the US government, and the Israeli government to justify a genocide. He cites the same sources that these parties cite when they go on stage to legitimize more military killing machinery shipments to Israel.
And October 7, last year, Hamas committed horrific acts of sexual violence. Cheryl, I thank you for all your work to bring to light the horrors of this issue and for your film about what happened on October 7.
In his video, Ethan spreads overt misinformation, just straight up lies about Hezbollah and Ansar Allah, or the Houthis, in order to delegitimize their struggle against Israel's genocide. He cites baseless claims from Saudi state propaganda outlets to attack the Houthis. He also cites a documentary about Ansar Allah, which he uses as proof of the claim that they brought back slavery, when the documentary wasn't even about the Houthis. It was about the Yemeni government before the Houthi takeover. He spreads long debunked Nakba denialist talking points that have been used for decades to legitimize Israeli.
So it's kind of what becomes obvious from what he's showing there is that, like, Ethan had an agenda already in his head, already had a narrative in his head, and he went out and just cherry-picked and searched for headlines that he thought matched his narrative. A lot of the times he didn't even watch or read what he presented, or he's just so stupid that he doesn't know that the Yemeni government before the Houthis is separate from the Houthis. Like, it's either you're stupid or you just didn't, were just cherry picking headlines to fit your predetermined narrative. Like, that's what happened. It's super clear.
The colonization of Palestine. Ethan cites sources that contradict his own claims directly, such as the UN report he claims proves the Hamas mass rapes allegation.
There's a UN report that concludes it happened,
which the report itself denies. He spends 20 minutes in the video smearing a 19-year-old survivor of the US-backed Saudi genocide in Yemen as a terrorist with zero credible evidence. He makes a number of transparently false anti-Semitism accusations, like his claim that Israel's ban on new account signups from Israel was anti-Semitic.
Around the end of the year, when people started talking about anti-Semitism on Twitch, Dan Saltman discovered the Israel ban when he was sent the code proving the block happened.
In reality, the ban also affected millions of non-Jews living in Israel and Palestinians in Palestine, as shown in the evidence he himself cites. The IP ban went into effect in both. Like all these Western liberal outlets,
it's anti-Semitic, it's anti-Semitic. They were only blocking the Jews. They were only blocking the Jews. When literally the evidence in the screenshot that you provided shows that it was the entire country was blocked because they were trying to prevent terrorist and war footage from being live streamed, which is, bad. It shows Palestinians as well were blocked, the entire country. So obviously this is just another window into Ethan's mind that, like, Israel is only for the Jewish people. The only real people in Israel are Jewish, the Israeli Jews, because in this scenario the Palestinians don't even exist to him. It's a targeted attack on Jews because the country of Israel is the Jews' country. It's not the Palestinians. Clearly, this is his thought process.
Ethan just takes the State Department line of thinking when it comes to terrorism, which his video is ostensibly a crusade against. By his own definition of terrorism, both the US and Israel are the largest terrorist organizations in the world, given their history of killing millions of innocent civilians across the globe. His focus is not on them, though, rather the groups that they consider to be terrorists, aka, the bad guys. He actually uses those exact words. He says they're the bad guys.
They are a designated terrorist group by the US, by the EU. These guys are clearly the bad guys.
The entire video is kind of a lie by omission, simply because of everything we just went over. How none of it is a factor, how none of the people people viewing the video that are unfamiliar with what's happening would ever come away with his video knowing the full picture, knowing some of the very valid reasons why someone like Hasan might be critical of Israeli atrocity propaganda, or might support groups like the Houthis for their heroic actions in the Red Sea against a genocidal regime. The biggest issue, I think, is that Ethan manages to do all of this while still calling himself a stalwart ally to the Palestinians.
I've been a stalwart supporter of the Palestinian cause for many years.
This is what makes liberal Zionism so insidious. He is using humanistic appeals to things like peace and safety, but doing so in a way that distracts from the actual source of the problem. The problem is Zionism and the genocidal Israeli state. That is what's causing these problems. And people that might otherwise be able to understand if presented with the facts of the situation.
I'm sorry, like, I'm so stuck on that word stalwart. Like, I know he saw that word somewhere. Like, he pulled that word out of his ass. Ethan struggles with, like, the most basic words all the time. And I just find it hilarious that he said that word, stalwart. I've been a stalwart supporter. I don't even know. I mean, contextually, I kind of know what the word means, but I had never heard anybody use it, like, in my life. And, like, I know he saw that somewhere and was like, that sounds good, and I'm going to use that word. It's a buzzword. It's a buzzword for him. It's just funny to me because I wonder I wonder what the backstory is behind where he saw that word and thought it, like, legitimized his, I'm a stalwart supporter. I always have been of the Palestinians. Like, give us some substance of how you've been a supporter. Like, explain how you support the Palestinians, in what way. Give us some details, some substance to how you support them. I've never seen or heard anything of substance that backs up what you're saying, that you're a stalwart supporter. Cool word, Ethan. Nice vocab, nice vocab.
Situation are simply led astray by people like Ethan, where a more right-wing Zionist might put off the average liberal with extremist claims and overtly genocidal language. A liberal Zionist draws you in with the facade of empathy. He wants to appear empathetic, as if he cares for these people, as if he doesn't ascribe to a genocidal ideology. So, in order to do that, he has to lie, and roping in otherwise progressive people into a death cult. Aside from this video being a nonsensical genocidal propaganda piece, it's also entirely unoriginal. The video is a culmination of a months-long campaign against Hasan and all these other creators and Twitch, the company, to smear them as terrorists and anti-Semites and get people, in trouble. The campaign began as a response to the suspension of the live streamer Asmongold. Asmongold made some comments that explicitly justified Israel's genocide of Palestinians in Gaza.
I'm not going to cry a fucking river when people who have genocide that's baked into their laws are getting genocided. They come from an inferior culture. I don't feel bad for them. I don't feel sorry for them. I don't care. I don't support them.
Following his suspension for these comments, a community of large content creators, most notably the live streamer Destiny, along with his fan base, rushed to Asmongold's defense, whitewashing and justifying his comments.
Meanwhile, Asmongold gets a 15-day ban for having a spicy take on the war.
So you have someone like Asmongold who breathes the wrong direction, says the wrong thing, and instantly gets banned.
In this situation, one could, if they were to extend the charitability.
He literally said they're an inferior culture. Inferior culture. I mean, if that's not TOS, if that's not racism, I don't know what is. When you literally call someone's entire culture, their ethnicity, their cultural background inferior, that is racism. That is genocidal behavior. I mean, he straight up said he's cool with them being genocided too. He gave a false, you can argue with Hamas. You can argue that Hamas has something in their charter. Of course, they have something in their charter against the Jews. They're being genocided. The genocide didn't start after October 7th. It started in 1948. That's why these people hate the Jews. I mean, I don't think it's that controversial to say that because they've been getting genocided by them for decades and decades. Does that mean every citizen in Gaza? That means every Palestinian is genocidal? No. Okay, that's racism. That's genocidal behavior. It's all of the above. And all these people are minimizing what he said and basically okaying it. They're backing him up. It's ridiculous.
could say that Asmongold was probably referring to extremists in the Islamic religion. Extremists in the Islamic religion.
The case of Asmongold's suspension from Twitch was then weaponized against these pro-Palestine voices, most notably Hasan, in an effort to get him deplatformed. To do this, they compiled a number of short clips taken from Hasan's live streams, using them to accuse Hasan of things like supporting and promoting terrorism, allegedly denying October 7th sexual violence, and making anti-Semitic statements. Each one of the clips and their associated accusations can be traced back to prominent posts on Destiny's subreddit. Some of the clips were sourced from videos that criticized Hasan from well over a year ago. These clips were initially hosted on a website created by a member of the campaign called HamasPiker.com. Soon after, another website was created, DanClancySucks.com, a reference to the CEO of Twitch, Dan Clancy. Another goal of this campaign was to get him fired from the company. This site also hosts all of these clips with their associated allegations: anti-Semitism, terrorist promotion, and rape denial. Eventually, several major YouTubers in the usually apolitical commentary sphere made videos that signal boosted these allegations to millions of viewers. Most of these videos used the same clips, many of them directly citing this smear campaign's website.
There's a website known as DanClancySucks.com.
Or there's also a website that's been created called DanClancySucks.com that goes over it all.
Another website, advertised on Twitch, shows a collection of ads.
Yeah, all these little twerps are doing a systematic propaganda campaign. And I'm going to go after all of them. I'm going to call, wait till I go all out on Destiny. I'm going to do a video about him. He's lucky I'm even calling him Destiny. The guy is a sex pest. He's a known sex pest. He is admitted and been exposed to sharing revenge porn, like on a massive scale. He's been recording people against their will for quite a long time. And yeah, he's gonna have his time to get called out as well. But these people are snakes. Every one of them.
Ads playing before the dishonestly framed clips we've looked at, and the contact information of the companies is provided. It auto-loads a preset email with just one click, allowing participants in the campaign to mass spam these companies with the related smears. There were several motivations behind this campaign. There were direct material incentives. On YouTube for the past few years, there's a big industry that's exploded in popularity, and it's based on a simple concept. Hasan bad, Hasan Piker is bad, and he's dumb, and bad and a terrorist, probably. We can call this the Hasanabi Dunk Video Industrial Complex. It's common for YouTubers during low view months to join in on the fun and make these types of videos, taking short clips from Hasan's thousands of hours of live streaming to misrepresent what he's saying, usually parroting the exact same talking points they're getting from the same YouTubers in the same community. They're watching each other's videos and making each other's videos. It's kind of like a perpetual cycle of dumb guy slop. It's interesting to see YouTube.
It's one big circle jerk, baby, and you ain't invited.
That typically cover TikTok drama and gaming content, randomly giving their opinions on genocide and geopolitics, but that's the result of such an ecosystem. It's not about the politics, it's about making money by attacking a guy they don't like. Because the guy in question happens to be a political content creator, they have to try to do politics. It's really funny to watch, honestly. It's also wild because the political content creator in question is an anti-genocide content creator, and the arguments they're attacking him for are anti-genocide arguments. So these creators, they're positioning themselves in opposition to him and his arguments, de facto positioning themselves on the pro-genocide side. Anti-genocide is pro-genocide. It's quite the precarious predicament they've placed themselves in. Do they realize it? No. Do they care? Probably not. But that's what's happening. That's what they're doing. The success of Ethan's video, which garnered over 3 million views in its first month, is a testament to the algorithmic viability of Hasan bad content. Get in front of a politically illiterate American audience and call a pro-Palestine influencer a terrorist.
Promoting hateful terrorist music videos.
Terrorist propaganda videos.
Terrorist propaganda video.
Collect big fat AdSense check. That's how it goes. And Ethan knew it would do well too, and made sure to get a sponsor for the video.
Thank you to ExpressVPN for sponsoring this video.
Which was a VPN company that happens to be owned by an Israeli billionaire with a history of funding and supporting the IDF. He's not a Zionist though, apparently. Apparently he's not a Zionist and he's pro-Palestine.
I've been a stalwart supporter of the Palestinian cause for many years.
A few years ago, Destiny.
Yeah, he's just having his video be funded and promoted, which by the way, he took that sponsorship out. I wonder why. I wonder if he maybe got some backlash or maybe realized it wasn't a good look to claim you're a stalwart supporter of Palestinians when the person sponsoring your video funds the IDF. Kind of weird, man. Kind of weird, Ethan. It's not matching up. The dots are not quite connecting in your favor, sir.
He was banned from Twitch. Since then, he has repeatedly attempted to be reinstated on the platform, and the latest attempt by using the campaign was probably the closest he's ever been in terms of putting pressure on the platform.
We're tired of your site changing the rules every week. Nobody knows what's going on. Get your shit together, unban Destiny, and fucking make a site that people actually want to go to.
Dedicated the last 2 weeks of my life basically to Steve's cause.
You're talking about the Twitch thing?
Yeah, destroying Twitch.
Some of the motivations for the campaign are political in nature, though, obviously. You know, Hasan Piker is one of the most prominent pro-Palestine voices on YouTube, and this campaign has been orchestrated by Zionists. The website that started this campaign, HamasPiker.com, doubled as a donation page for a prominent Zionist organization. Since learning about the existence of Israel on October 7th of 2023, Destiny has positioned himself as its #1 cheerleader, showing up to debates to defend the genocidal apartheid state using Zionist talking points and denying that a genocide is taking place. On the Lex Friedman Israel-Palestine debate, Destiny justified Israel's slaughter of 4 Palestinian children in the Gaza beach bombings using talking points plucked directly from IDF spokespeople.
Those kids weren't just on the beaches as often stated in articles. Those kids were literally coming out of a previously identified Hamas compound that they have operated from. They literally,
Mr.
you can
Borelli,
Google it. You can
Mr.
Google
Borelli,
it.
with all due respect, with all due
Those kids were terrorists. They were clearly coming out of the Hamas compound, you moron. Like, can't you tell those kids are terrorists? Like, does he not hear the words coming out of his own mouth and realize how stupid he sounds? Like, you're calling kids terrorists, bro. Shut the hell up.
respect, you're such a fantastic moron. It's terrifying.
I left Finkelstein's iconic response in there because he is 100% correct. The events of that day were witnessed by dozens of journalists. There is no real dispute as to what happened except from, of course, the party that slaughtered the children, which is Israel, and in turn its propagandists, like Destiny.
A group of boys, cousins, playing on the beach. Now, were running for their lives. Until seconds later, another shell hit. Israel claimed it was firing on Hamas militants at the port, but the dead were 4 young boys.
He's also explicitly called for the genocide of Palestinians.
Honestly, I'm pro-genocide. Like, it sounds really shitty, but like, I think that Israel should just drop its fucking borders about where it is now, and basically Palestinians can.
It sounds really shitty, you know. I actually saw this live. I saw this whole debate live. The whole debate. This was his position. I'm pretty sure he later tried to say that he was just joking in this video. But no, he literally was debating this position the entire time. And of course, like, this was the beginning. This is when he was still like doing Wikipedia research every night to like form his narrative and cherry pick little. But he eventually had to move to just straight to the IDF propaganda because Wikipedia was really hard to like finagle the narrative out of that. So he just switched straight to IDF talking points, and he stopped. He learned that outright saying he's pro-genocide was not really the move, not really a good look. So he stopped doing it after the backlash from this video, and then he tried to say it was a joke. But like I said, I watched this whole debate, and that was his starting position, and that was his ending position. He didn't ever say it was a joke. There was no joking. It's his position. The only difference is, like, he stops saying I'm specifically pro-genocide. He doesn't use those exact words anymore because he can't really... there's no debating out of that one. Once you admit you're pro-genocide, there's no real... the debate's over at that point. You're just a scumbag.
Go live in another place. That's really shitty, but like, that's about where I'm at.
It's this guy and his community who are the source for every one of the arguments that Ethan makes in his video. Do stalwart advocates for Palestinians normally collaborate with advocates for Palestinian genocide? No, they do not, in my opinion. Destiny's podcast co-host Dan Saltman, the other main driver behind this campaign and the one spearheading the creation of these smear websites, is also a Zionist. Saltman promoted pro-Israel organizations like the ADL and stopped anti-Semitism, and Zionist politicians like Richie Torres, who shared and boosted the campaign. He consistently weaponizes Zionist talking points, like asserting that any reference to Zionism is actually just coded anti-Semitic language, the implication there being, of course, that criticizing Israel and Zionism is inherently anti-Semitic. That's a very common Zionist tactic. It's like the Zionist tactic, in the West at least. Perhaps the most significant motivation, though, and indicative of the sort of unserious nature of this campaign, is just spite. These people all seem to have deep personal vendettas against Hasan and these other creators that should give one pause when considering the seriousness of the campaign that they're running.
God, he's so cringe. He's like such a cringe loser. I would pay we'd raise $1 million to send this dude to go fight in Yemen, and then all of us would volunteer for the Navy. Holy shit, he's such a cringe.
Destiny has, for almost 5 years, just obsessively talked about Hasan on his channel. He's made video after video about him. The frequency of these videos increased after Destiny was banned from Twitch. In the span of time since then, he has uploaded almost 80 videos about Hasan out of a total of like 450 videos. So that's at least 1/5 of his working life spent talking about Hasan. In contrast, in the same span of time, Hasan has uploaded over 1,200 videos, and he's talked about Destiny a total of 5 times. 5. 4 of them have come in the last few months while covering Destiny's role in this smear campaign and the credible allegations of sex crimes against him. So that's less than 1% of his coverage. This isn't an internet beef. Hasan has a stalker. With Ethan, I feel like I can kind of spot the moment that he started going into this direction, which was the moment that people started calling him racist for saying racist stuff. It was one argument he made where he compared Jewish Voice for Peace anti-Zionist activists to capos.
There was Jewish collaborators with fucking Nazis.
Ethan, don't.
Wow, we've really come full circle here because this is the video I was trying to find. This is the clip I was trying to find earlier. So hold up. But yeah, this is when he first compared Jewish Voice for Peace to capos. Let's roll the tape.
Don't do that.
Just to capos.
There was Jewish collaborators with fucking Nazis.
Ethan, don't do that, please. Don't say that the Jews' Voice for Peace are akin to capos. Like that's.
I'm telling you that the mere existence of Jewish voices is not a leg to stand on. I don't understand that.
The chat started calling him a Zionist freak because that's a Zionist freak thing to say. And then since then, he's sort of constructed an entire mind prison around the idea that he's not racist and anyone calling him racist is actually the real racists. Because Hasan's community is politically oriented and is able to spot the racist rhetoric in question, that means they're all extremists and Hasan is leading them, so he's an extremist. And that Hasan and them are all the problem and that he's a perfect angel, which is the direction he's taken, it seems like.
My only crime is wanting a two-state solution instead of one, and thinking it's not okay to kill Israeli civilians. That's it. That's why they're calling me a Nazi Zionist.
And now he's just totally gone off the rails. He spends most of his time cowering in fear behind Instagram stories that people can't respond to. Every single one of the uploads on his personal YouTube channel in the last number of months have been targeted towards Hasan. He spent most of his live podcast talking about Hasan and calling him a terrorist and whatnot.
What is this? Bro, I have not seen a single one of his fucking Instagram stories. I didn't know he was posting about me this much. Oh my God, every day? Every single day? No.
There was that one Instagram story where Ethan Klein was having to evacuate due to the wildfires or something, and he managed to make the post about Hasan and about how Hasan probably thinks it's awesome that his house might burn down while his family is in the background trying to evacuate the wildfires. Just wild. Ethan Klein has repeatedly denied any association with this campaign and Destiny or his community. That may have something to do with the recent credible allegations that Destiny is a sex criminal, but this is false. Ethan has been caught on his live podcast browsing the Destiny subreddit for arguments to use to attack Hasan. Leaked Discord logs show Dan Saltman admitting to exchanging emails with Ethan and the H3 team personally during the campaign. And even if there wasn't evidence of direct communication, the far more important connection is that Ethan is saying the exact same things, using the same out-of-context clips that everyone else used to call Hasan a terrorist or whatever. It's been a group effort. That's just what it is. So just a few final thoughts here. Zionism is Nazism. It's an ethnic supremacist, expansionist, colonial ideology. You can't have Zionism without genocide and ethnic cleansing. That's the end goal of the project. It's what it is. Palestinians are there, and for the Zionist project to be complete, they have to go. Starve them out, bomb them, destroy everything they need to live. Those are the methods. Those are what they're employing as we speak. And like Nazism, Zionism cannot be defeated through reform or debate. It must be destroyed from the outside through efforts made by the Palestinian people, the Palestinian resistance, and coalitions of allies. As history has shown, the downfall of these kinds of racist ideologies is possible, but Zionists cannot be a part of this process. They're Zionists. They uphold Zionism by spreading Zionist propaganda and spending all their time and effort attacking anti-Zionists, even as those anti-Zionists are actively fighting against a genocide that Zionism is the ideological pretext for. In the case of liberal Zionists like Ethan Klein, using his weird personal Zionist crash out as a jumping off point to educate people about the ideology that he adheres to is a great use of time, I think. And Bad Empanada has done a fantastic job with that. His videos have reached pretty wide audiences and exposed them to the reality and history of the genocidal Zionist project. That's a really good thing. That's a really important thing that he's doing. And I think many of you can probably also help out with that. Most of you have smartphones and cameras and TikTok. So go ahead, start posting about it. Spread the word. Aside from being a morally good thing to do, it's also...
Hey, that's why I'm here, baby. I would just like to say I was planning to get online. I was planning to be a creator. I've been planning it for a while, but this was a big motivating factor for me. Like, there's just a lot of voices out there that are perpetuating genocide. And that's before we even talk about the dehumanizing language that we have right here in the United States against immigrants, and I'm going to talk about that more as well. But I got an interesting little visual graphic here that kind of shows what we're up against, right? Look at this. So these are the total following of top right-leaning and left-leaning online shows. And as you can see, it's absolutely dominated The red being the right-leaning shows. And I know some people will debate this. Oh, Joe Rogan is he's not right-wing, blah blah blah. No, he endorsed Republicans, endorsed GOP, endorsed Trump. He was at his inauguration. All his shows lately, he just had on like a white nationalist Nazi propagandist. This is like most recent guest. He may have been different years ago, before Trump broke his brain and before he moved to Texas and started making, Dana White and that circle his main group of friends. He might have been different back then, but you can't make that argument now. But yeah, and then, all these others are all right-leaning. Like, look at what we're up against. Like, and it's because they have funding from billionaires. Like, they're getting paid. Like, leftism is the road less traveled. It's the narrow road of truth. And, no one's funding us. No one's got our backs. The only thing pushing us forward is knowing that we're right and fighting for peace, fighting against these genocides, and fighting against, I won't say fighting against the United States, because I want to improve the United States. I critique the United States not because I hate it, but because I love it. I want to change. I want to acknowledge our history and be honest about it and say, look, the first step is always acknowledgement, right? That's always the first step. But people hate that. There's a war against that in this country, and we've got to stand up to it. But yeah, this, I got to get this off the screen. It looks like fucking measles, chicken pox. But yeah, that's what we're up against. That's what my motivation is, to get this message out. And coming to Kick is like, a lot of people on Kick is like right wing. I don't know enough about it. Maybe there's more leftists on it now, but I'm gonna try to get my message out to I'm gonna try to stream on every fucking channel, on every platform. Every day of the week, I'm gonna stream on a different platform. But like, look at this shit. This is what we're up against. This is right-leaning. Like, goddamn, like, the little blue dots, you can barely read them. And like Trevor Noah, the Young Turks, the Breakfast Club, like, these aren't even strong left. Oh, what are you gonna do? What are you gonna do, Bang? What's your name? What's your name? What are you gonna do, ban me? Okay, all right. We got our first follower. That's all that matters. We got our first fucking follower. Let's finish our video. But yeah, man, I'm motivated. I'm trying to get the message out.
Also becoming sustainable. It's algorithmically viable. The Ethan Klein crash-out industrial
follow,
complex is booming, and we can harness it as a propaganda machine to expose Zionism for the genocidal ideology that it is. You may have the feeling, as I often have, that the history books will look back upon these times and those who supported the Gaza genocide with shame and horror. The only problem with that is that these people feel no shame. They're here to make money and to convince themselves that they aren't evil. And the way they do that is by lying, by spreading liberal Zionist propaganda. It's profitable, and it's easy, and it's acceptable. You're allowed to say that you think all Palestinians should die.
I'm pro-genocide.
And still get invited to Jubilee as the resident liberal. You're allowed to do it and run your quirky, epic, silly podcast and make hundreds of thousands of dollars doing that because the Western media ecosystem encourages it. There will be no justice for the Palestinian people if all we do is watch content about what's happening. Consumption is not politics. There will be no justice for the victims of this genocide unless we all actively fight for it. From the position that most of the viewers of this video have, that's by using the resources and time to continue to speak out, preserve the record of what's actually happened in Gaza, name the perpetrators, and highlight and boost the voices that understand these facts more than anyone in the world, that is, the Palestinian people. Don't stop sharing their stories or contributing to direct aid. I'll leave a document below with some Palestinian voices and outlets that you should follow and campaigns to contribute to. In If I Must Die, Rafat El-Arir tells the story of Yasser Ashur, a young Palestinian survivor of Operation Cast Lead, Israel's late 2008 onslaught in Gaza. During Cast Lead, Israel bombed a UN school, which was also designated a safe zone, killing 44 civilians. Ashur was 14 at the time of the attack, and Israel killed 5 of his classmates and friends. Ever since the massacre, Ashur has tried to honor the memories of his classmates by exposing exposing Israeli crimes. I run a few Twitter accounts with tens of thousands of followers. He said, "The battle for justice for Palestine over social media is crucial, and we have to win it. We don't have Israel's billions, but we have the power of the truth." And that's what we have. We have the truth. October 7th blew the lid off the genocidal Israeli project. October 7th is the reason you're here watching this video today. Israel's response to it has radicalized a generation of people by exposing the Israeli state and its backers in the West for what they are: depraved, ethnic supremacist, genocidal lunatics. That's the truth. We have all these tools to speak the truth, and now's the time to do that. So just do it. I don't know. Don't stop fighting for it. Free Palestine.